Now, the last thing I want to share with you today is something that I've really been doing a lot of study on, a lot of research on, and I found a lot of really, really impactful things about this. And it's the method of problem solving. And I just want to touch on the very first part of this, and we'll talk about a little bit more as we go forward. But if you can look on the screen. So when you're dealing with a problem, the very first thing you need to do is to define the problem. And there's three main questions that we're going to ask whenever we define the problem. And the very first question is this a problem? Now, a lot of times people look at something and they say, well, of course it's a problem. Now, a lot of times people look at this kind of stuff and they say, well, of course it's a problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't be dealing with it. I wouldn't have an issue with it. But that's really not what you need to think about whenever you're asking, is this a problem? What a lot of people fail to do, and I think this is why problems don't get solved and we have a very selfish society, is that when we ask, is this really a problem, what we're really saying is, does this bother me? Does it inconvenience me? Is it something that I don't like, that I would like to be fixed? And that's really not the question that should be asked at all. Anybody all throughout history, the people that we would consider geniuses, Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, people like that, Thomas Edison, people like this, they didn't just tackle a problem the way that the average person tackles a problem. They would take a problem and they would ask, is this a problem? But in doing that, they would look at the problem from every perspective they possibly could consider. Now, a big part of that is analyzing and trying to see through somebody else's eyes. Now, that's a very difficult thing, and I feel like empathy is something that our society lacks tremendously. Understanding somebody else's perspective, understanding where someone else is coming from. I would say as a whole, society is not taught to do that, and we really struggle with it. It's not a natural human thing to do because we are naturally selfish, we're ingrown, we want what's best for ourselves, but we need to learn how to empathize if we ever want to be true problem solvers. So this is kind of the way that I would encourage you to go about problem solving, is when you look at something, I want you to ask yourself this question: does this benefit anybody else but me? That's the first thing I want you to just kind of focus on. That does this benefit anybody else but me? Now, the second thing I want you to focus on is there information that I'm not aware of? And the answer to that question is always yes. There's always going to be something that you don't know because you're not everybody and you don't know what everybody else is thinking. So when you're problem solving, don't just base it on your opinion. Don't just base it on the facts that you have. Investigate, search it out, try to figure it out. Especially whenever you're dealing with a leader or something like that, where you think they're doing something wrong and there may be a reason why they're making the decision that they're making. They may agree that it's not the best, but given the circumstances that they're aware of, it may be the best for the situation at hand. So you need to first ask, does this benefit anybody else? Then secondly, you need to ask, is there information that I'm not aware of? Remember, the answer to that question is always going to be yes, even once you investigate, but investigate as thoroughly as possible. Whenever you do that, begin to look at it from different perspectives. Now, I teach technology at an elementary school, and we've been working through this, and I gave my students a scenario where I said, okay, imagine that we have to come to school at 5 a.m. every morning instead of 7. And of course, all the kids were like, oh, that's horrible, that's a problem. And I asked them, is this a problem? Every hand went up. I said, but here's the thing that you don't know. If we come to school at 5, that means we get to go home at 1. And all of a sudden, the hands started going down. They started seeing, maybe it's not as big of a problem as I thought it was. And then I began to just talk to them about some other scenarios. Again, this whole situation was made up, but you know, it made for a good example. I said, well, our school is housed in a church. And I said, what if the church were to say that we have to be out every day by 1? And that's something that we have to do. And our principal had to make a decision that if we were going to be out by 1, then let's push it back till 5. Otherwise, in order to get our minutes in, we'd have to go into the summer. So he made a decision, and all of a sudden, that problem that we had doesn't become a problem. In fact, we realize it was his solution to a different problem. Then I gave another scenario. I said, what if there was a student who had a very, very important appointment every day at 2? And if he had an appointment every day at 2, and we'd typically get out of school at 3, then he would never be able to go to his appointment unless we go to school at 5, get done at 1. And so then I asked, does anybody benefit from what you saw as a problem? And of course they all realized, wow, someone does benefit from that. So my point in this is I want you to realize that your perspective is not the only one that matters. When you're looking at a problem, that's not the only thing that you need to be considering. So whenever you ask, is it a problem? And then you stop and say, okay, does anybody benefit? Oh, if they do, then you've got to realize it's not a problem for everybody. It's an inconvenience for me. And that's something that's very important, and I feel like most people confuse problems with personal inconvenience.